Welcome to Under the Flat Hat with Chris Burnett and Kevin Heatley. Stories from the front lines of America's public lands and the people who care for them. Honest, unfiltered, and straight from under the hat. You're listening to Under the Flat Hat, a podcast exploring the people, politics, and pressures shaping America's public lands. I'm Chris Burnett, a former National Park Ranger, whiskey distiller, and federal land manager turned attorney. I'm joined by my co-host, a national conservation leader, former National Park superintendent, and an example of why the administration should extend the border wall around New Jersey, Kevin Heatley. Together, we share stories, shine a light on hard truths, and celebrate the resilience of those working behind the scenes. Whether you've worn the flat hat or just care about the future of our parks and public lands, this is your place to listen, learn, and connect.
Put the disclaimer in there. Put the disclaimer in right now. This podcast is not designed to be calming and soothing. That is not the focus of this podcast. If you're tuning in right now to watch this podcast to get soothed, like it's an NPR broadcast about how beautiful the landscapes are on our American national parks, you better turn around and get the fuck out of here, because that's not what this podcast is supposed to be about. That's ridiculous. At least that's not how I feel about it. Now, I like going out there. I like going out in the landscapes. I hate being around people.
I don't think that, that's not disputed. I think what we're trying to get across at some level is, we want to protect these places and we want to protect the people that are protecting these places. But some of the stuff that people are doing right now and in the past have just been jackasses. And they have done some really horrible things, whether it was intentional or not. We can argue about it, but there's a lot of stuff that happens in the federal government that is not good, and someone needs to point it out. And when you're a federal employee, we've talked about this multiple times, and we need to bring this up in one of the podcasts, is when you're a federal employee, you don't have the free speech rights that everyone else does. When your job will be impacted, you could be fined, imprisoned, depending on how far you go. There is definitely a chilling effect on bringing any of this stuff to light that me and you right now just don't have, right? We have other chilling effects.
Now you're scaring me.
We have other chilling effects, but as an employee, you don't have the same free speech rights. They say you do, but when you read the laws and the policy, the ethics policies and all that type of stuff, you just don't. And it always kind of tripped me out when we have employees that are wanting to protest, right, during their off time, and they would go to protest in uniform. Like, are you kidding me? Right? Do not do that. Someone's going to lock your butt up. And then, even though it is, you can do stuff on your free time, but it can't reflect on the National Park Service. They can't know you're a National Park Service person or federal employee. And so when you use social media and you're posting multiple things, like stuff at work or talking about your life as a ranger, and then you go to a protest and you do this stuff in your off time, they can construe those posts along with your other posts to say, well, you're not reflecting the National Park Service in a good light, and then you can get in trouble that way and still be in violation of the Hatch Act. And people, they've got to, the public should know that you don't get the whole truth. You don't get nothing but the truth, the whole truth, blah blah blah, because there's a chilling effect. They can't bring this stuff to light.
You can't handle the truth, right?
You can't handle the truth.
So let me ask you something along those lines, because this is a really important topic. I've joked about once you once you retire, your First Amendment rights are fully reinstated. But here's an example. Like I have uniform paraphernalia from the National Park Service that I still have. I paid for it. I own it. It's mine,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm no longer employed by the federal government. Now, if I were to wear my flat hat, well, I never bought the flat hat. Full disclosure for our listening audience, I did not buy the flat hat. It was
I'm going
too
to edit that
expensive.
out.
Yeah, don't. I bought the Breezer. I was the godfather of the Breezer hat. I should go run and get my Breezer right now. See how dapper I look. But my question is, if I were to wear, say, the ball cap with the National Park Service logo on it, and I go to a No Kings, and I'm on video or something, ICE is taking video from while they're targeting people with pepper balls, and I've got my sign up, protect me from the pepper ball, but I've got my national park hat on. Is there any legal liability or exposure that I'm wearing the official logo of the National Park Service?
So basically, the logo itself is fair use, right? So you can wear it. I think where you may run into some trouble, and maybe not. Let's say opening up to risk. Let's put it that way. Is they can make the argument that you're trying to represent the National Park Service or quote impersonate a National Park Service employee,
right,
at your rally. And in that case, I think you win because when you're retired, you're not wearing the full uniform. It'd be really hard to mistake you as being an official representative at a No Kings rally when all you've got on is a hat, right? But they could try to make that argument, which could lead to you have to get an attorney to fight in court, and it probably gets thrown out after a couple of motions, maybe a summary judgment. But then that costs you personal dollars, right? Filing fees, paying an attorney. I could represent you if it was in federal court, but if it's not in federal court, you got to get somebody in Oregon, right?
Well,
So
something like that, would it have to go to federal court?
Well,
if it's impersonating and again, like you said, it wouldn't be the full uniform.
Right. It would typically, if they were going to try to do it, it would be a local DA,
right.
a federal DA. And do they really want to do that? They have bigger fish to fry. I mean, we know one of the issues that we could talk about as an episode on this thing is enforcement of the law within public lands, and how a lot of times they resort to just writing a ticket for things because the DAs around the country are so overwhelmed with cases, they won't prosecute. We've had, this is hearsay, but I've heard stories from the law enforcement officers involved that have arrested someone for carrying a gun, assault in a park, smoking weed on federal property, all these different things. And the DAs just throw them out. We're not going to do that because we got bigger fish to fry. We need to go after the guys that are, growing 15 acres of weed inside of Yosemite. We're going after people that are doing, child trafficking through federal lands. We're going after people that are doing bigger stuff. NAGPRA. We're going after people who are stealing artifacts, people that are destroying or attempting to destroy federal infrastructure or buildings or monuments or whatever. And so a lot of times these smaller, what I would call smaller cases, just never go anywhere. If they can write a ticket for it, they will. If the person doesn't pay it, then it goes into, they could try to get a warrant. There's other things that they can try to do, but a lot of it's just paperwork, not actual going to court and defending your honor or anything like that. So it's actually kind of detrimental in a lot of cases because, when you have when you talk about increased visitation and increased impact on the resource of the parks, if people realize that, I can drive off this road over here, and even though it's against the law, 99% they're not going to come after me. And if they even do stop me, it's probably not going to get picked up by the DA. They're just going to, slap my hand and tell me not to do it again type
Oh
thing.
yeah, I mean,
Um,
I've seen personally when I was with the BLM and I was a field manager, and we had cases where people started a fire and fled the scene. They were shooting tracer bullets and or shooting at tannerite, and started a fire in the fall on the mountainside and burn up hundreds and hundreds of acres. And 5 years later, the BLM finally comes after them for the suppression bill and the restoration bill, and it's like $900,000. And of course, the individual, because the kind of folks that do that thing don't typically have, they make poor life decisions. They've typically slipped a couple of rungs on the social ladder, and you know they went after him for the $900,000 and said, "I don't have it," and they let it go for
right.
$900,000. So me getting sent to Gitmo for wearing the National Park Service hat on Under the Flat Hat podcast or at a No Kings rally or I'll give you a real example. I mean, and this is, and I respect this too. I mean, I don't want to get someone else in trouble. Um, I was out about a week ago on the Klamath River and was looking at a lot of with all the other public that's out there, looking at all the salmon that are coming back up. This Klamath River is the restoration project, the largest dam removal in the history of the solar system, where they took out 4 hydroelectric dams, and the expectation was salmon wouldn't return for years and years. Well, they were back in weeks. So this is the first full year. This is the fall run now, and there's thousands of them. It's spectacular. So I'm out there, and we're talking. My associate and I are talking to one of the ODF and W technicians at one of their gates that they have, where they monitor the salmon movement with an underwater camera. Super cool stuff. And there's the salmon spawn and then they die a couple of days later. So there's a big dead salmon, and he's got it, and he's taking scales off it and everything, taking samples because they look at the genetics and all. So we ask him if we can take a picture with this salmon because the thing's like 15 pounds or so. And my associate took my picture, and I won't mention who he is. He's a super great guy. I really love him. He's a great guy, super intelligent. And he takes my picture, but I have the National Park Service ball cap on. And he expressed concern on that picture before he forwarded to me not to release that picture because he doesn't want ODF and W to get in trouble with some of the adjacent landowners that they're allowing National Park Service employees on the site. And it wasn't closed to federal employees. It was actually owned by the nonprofit that took the dams down. But so there was that concern, and I respect that. I'm not going to violate his his trust by putting that picture out
Right,
there.
right. Yeah,
But
and that's a different thing, when it's, First Amendment covers government action, right?
mm-hmm.
Now, companies and you and I, like if we don't want to do something because of the optics, or we're forced not to do something because of the optics of a partner we're working with or a friend we're visiting or whatever, that's a different thing. And that's respectful. That's being respectful of the person that invited you, or that is working with you. And I think that's something that we can all agree to, as professionals, that we should do, right? If they ask us not to share this or share that or whatever, and then sometimes it's legally mandated, right? Like when we were talking about like this podcast, if we share anything that someone has explicitly told us not to talk about because it involved them personally. If you can talk about things generally, but like you just did, you don't mention his name. You don't say where you're at. You're protecting him and his wishes, right? And that's the respectful thing to do. And then in other cases, like if we're going to use information, like one of the things that we'll be doing is every time a guest comes on, we'll be having them sign a release. right? You and I, because we're co-hosts of this, we have that. Our agreement gives us the ability to do that. But anybody else will ask for a release, and then we'll be able to share their information. But we couldn't bring someone over, on, talk to them, broadcast it on our podcast or video or whatever, without doing that, without risking, their reprisal, whatever that may look like, right?
Right. Understood. Yeah.
But then it comes back down to the respect portion of things that we agree with, we try to do, even when we're yelling at people, we try to be respectful about it, even if we are motherfucking them, because we try to do it in a respectful way.
And it's true because especially people that I respect. I don't want to violate their trust. I mean, that's one of the basic codes that I've always brought to my positions as a manager is don't violate the trust of the people that you work with or work for or work for you. And that's, once you lose that trust, you're sunk. So you made a good point though earlier about you're not wearing the full uniform, right? So could people construe that, or a reasonable person construe that as representing yourself as a part of the agency? So if I have the winter jacket on, it has the logo on the shoulder. If I have the cap on, and I've got the T-shirt that says National Park Service on the back, but I don't have the official boots, I don't have the official belt. And if there's one thing both of us know from being in the federal government, when you're in a uniform agency, like when I was with the Corps of Engineers, you violate that uniform code. You put that nameplate 2.5 inches instead of 2 inches above your breast pocket, and somebody's going to point to you and give you a hard time. And
I think that the best way to explain that is, so the military, as you mentioned, has a very strict code of uniform use, not only for the members of the armed services. I was in the Air Force, and if I had a badge out of place, I was technically out of uniform, and I would be written up for it, an infraction of some sort. They also take pains to, when people wear the uniform outside of the service and they're not service members, like what we always heard, and I would have to go check to see if this is actually accurate, but if you've got someone's real name on it, like, my jacket has Burnett, senior airman or staff sergeant, stripes, my MOS, all that type of stuff on my uniform. They always said, well, take the name tag off. If you take the name tag off, then you're out of uniform anyway. And if you're not wearing the whole thing, no one's,
right.
Someone may say something to you, typically, an old white guy from the American Legion. Now I'm a member of the American Legion, so I can say this. I'm an old white guy from the American Legion.
But you left out the old part, so I'll grant you that you're not an old guy.
But a very good example is any military movie you've ever watched in your entire life. They are in uniform, but there's always something wrong with the uniform. Okay. Always. That's how they get around the U.S. code over uniform wear.
Right.
So they'll have, ribbons, the awards in the wrong location. They'll do something to make that uniform not be right. If you ever watch the show with National Park Rangers, out in the field, chasing nuclear weapons, blah, 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 the uniform will be jacked up in some way. Either the patch is wrong, or they don't have a patch on, or whatever. That's how they get around it. So
this is why I was concerned about the staff cuts. It's because we couldn't chase down, nuclear terrorists and stuff within Crater Lake. But so this is my point then, is that since the uniform code is so specific, in these different agencies, if I'm out in public post-employment with the federal government and I'm wearing a portion of that uniform, wouldn't that be a very easy defense, just like you're describing they do in the movie? Yeah,
I think
because
so. And
even when
but
I worked at the agencies, I couldn't get the uniform on right. I was always in violation because
because
I
you're a
spent
slacker.
I'm a slacker. I spent 12 years in Catholic school. I have an ingrained animosity and visceral reaction to being in a uniform, and that's thanks to being beaten to a pulp by the very pious nuns of St. Philip the
Right.
Apostle School. Now I'll probably get in trouble for mentioning them specifically, but I spent 8 years there, and then I spent another 4 years in a Catholic high school. And uniforms to me, um,
Just
they're
claim it
just
as a religious belief.
yeah, I do. And this is an interesting thing too. When the COVID thing happened, and we had a lot of people putting in for religious exemptions from vaccination, um, and there was no definition of what religion is because it's just any sincerely held belief.
Yes.
And there's
Yep.
no way I have a sincerity meter that I can hook up to you and make sure your belief is sincere and you're not full of shit. Um, my contention was if I wanted to wear, say, the Yankee pinstripes, and I claimed that I was a the the Yankees were a religious observation for me. Watching the Yankees is a religious thing for me. Then I could technically, as reasonable accommodation, and now I'm going off in left field, but it's all related. It's all about
Oh,
what
it
you
is.
wear, right? Is okay. Could I go into work wearing the Yankee pinstripes and claim I need to wear these pinstripes because it's part of my religion? And technically, they couldn't contest that because if I said it was a sincere belief, it was religious belief. But the whole uniform thing is very interesting to me because it ties back into this free speech and how, as you mentioned early on, our free speech rights are uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Let's just say
Abridged.
inhibited. Yeah, abridged. That's a nice way to put it. Very politically correct and non-judgmental, you know. It sounds like something you would get from HR. You're you're yeah, let's put this in a framework that's very, milk toast. We're abridging your free speech rights. And I understand because I've been in circumstances where some idiot says something and then to the public or a customer, and then it becomes a public relations nightmare, or they say something that doesn't reflect the official position, and this was both in the private and the public sector of whatever organization you're working for. At the same time, I got in all kinds of trouble at the Corps of Engineers for, wearing portions of the uniform that I thought was helpful because you're showing the brand, of the Corps of Engineers, yet they flipped out that I was wearing the wrong pants. And I was like, what's the matter? I'm wearing white shoes after Labor Day. Why don't you guys
Yeah.
relax?
Yeah. Well, in
And
the Park Service, you get some of that depending on who you're talking to.
same thing in a
And
Corps.
right. In the Corps, I could see how they are a little bit more strict about it simply because they're attached. They are the Army. Park Service, we came from the Army, but some people there's a lot of people in the Park Service that have no idea about uniform standards within the Park Service. And the people that care the most are LE, law enforcement.
Oh
And
yeah,
but they
yeah.
have a particular reason for that, right?
That's
They
legitimate.
have that is legitimate. People have to know by looking at them that they are the authority in that place, whether it's in a back box canyon or it's on the front range on a road, whatever. They have to know the person they're interacting with has to instantly recognize they are an authority.
You see, now why didn't
Because
I wish I had talked to you like 40 years ago when I started in management, and I could have had this advice and known that if I dressed a certain way, I would be recognized as the authority. My whole life trajectory would have been different. If people just looked at me and they go, "He's the authority. He's an authority.
yeah,
Just look at the hat he's wearing. He's an authority."
that's part of the reason for the uniform is to especially like even with interp rangers out in the field. When you have that uniform on, it's supposed to be a sign of I'm supposed to be here. I know what's going on. I'm an authority figure of some sort, whether it's LE or an interp ranger or maintenance person or whatever. Um, and people, they, depending on the culture. Now we can start talking about culture. If I had this happen a couple times at Grand Canyon. Sometimes people from Mexico, because of the strained relationship between the ruling class and the underclass in Mexico, a lot of Mexican visitors avoid rangers. They see them in the uniform and they think they're border patrol, or they think they're, a Mexican police or something like that. So they run and hide. But the idea of the ranger uniform is to be open and welcoming in order to help people and help keep people safe. So as an example, so I worked at the Grand Canyon for a number of years, and I worked in the headquarters building most of that time. I worked for the superintendent as their executive assistant. And so when he was out of the office, I was kind of doing whatever he wanted me to do, to help manage the park. But I'd go and walk across the road through the woods over to the grocery store to go get some lunch. And whenever I did that, if I was in uniform, I was like, okay, I've got about an hour. It takes me 5 minutes to get over there, 5 minutes to get back, 10 minutes to eat. Okay, I think I could do it, because it never failed. Every time I'd leave that office or be out in public inside a park with my uniform on, I end up being Mr. Tour Guide.
Right.
They see someone in uniform. Hey, where is this? What is up with this? Why don't we have this here? Where are the buses? Where's the bus
Right.
stop? All this stuff. And it's my duty as a, National Park Service employee to help those people. It's like basic customer service, right? And so I just kind of build it into my time. If I'm going to go out into public, I need to be ready for whoever. There was one day I went to go get, there's a lodge, Maswick Lodge. It's like a cafeteria type thing at the Grand Canyon. And I went over there to eat with a group of my, actually my employees. At the time I was the chief planner. And so we were just doing a little lunch grab and go, get some coffee, hang out for a little while. And while I'm there, this like 6, 7, maybe 8-year-old comes up with their junior ranger book. And then so I spent the next 15 minutes working with that child on their junior ranger stuff so I could sign it off for them. And so they got to meet a ranger at the national park and do their ranger book. And it was right after COVID, and we hadn't hired our seasonals yet, so we really didn't have any interp rangers at park. But because I was an NPS employee, a uniformed NPS employee, I filled the role as a ranger. So
Right.
that brings up another weird thing that a lot of people outside the park, park system don't realize. Not everybody's a technical ranger, and there are 2 different types of technical rangers. You have, I could give you the series, but that's probably getting too technical. But it's 0025 Park Ranger. And you have interp ranger and law enforcement rangers underneath that. But generally, any uniformed person in the Park Service is called ranger, because we all have this underlying set of duties and responsibilities to serve the public, protect the government trust, preserve the resource, which happens to be the park or the historic building or the endangered species at that part, or the wildlife and mineral, whatever it may be, the ecosystem, if you will. And so there's a lot of people that do other jobs in the park, and that people don't know this either. There are engineers and maintenance folks. There are public relations people. There are cops. There are your traditional interp ranger. You have management people, superintendents and division chiefs and stuff like that. And they're all collectively called ranger because of these underlying duties. And so yeah, that's why when we talk about under the flat hat and we're looking out for park rangers, I don't limit it in my mind anyway to just law enforcement or interp rangers. It's the entire group. And I would say the same thing about BLM. BLM has park rangers, LE rangers. They also have a few interp rangers in a few different places like Berryessa, and I've met a couple of guys from there that did interp stuff. But the rest of the BLM staff in my mind, they're still rangers because they're protecting that resource, following the laws and rules of their particular enabling legislation, right?
Right.
And so I see that. I attribute that to like every public land management agency. Um, these people are
Yeah,
all
it's
out
it's a
there.
it's a very ubiquitous term, and
Yeah,
I agree. I mean, and absolutely, like there is a real benefit to having some type of identifiable characteristic that people, like under the flat hat. The flat hat itself is iconic,
yeah.
hence the name of it. I hate the hat logistically, and the aesthetics of it don't resonate with me. But
It's
as a
uncomfortable.
yeah, I mean, it's why I was the superintendent at Crater Lake that the other superintendent had said, no, you can't wear the breezer hat. The breezer hat being a fedora type thing that's a little bit more, um, well, ergonomically friendly, and it's better solar radiation interception, the whole 9 yards. But I said, okay, we're going to allow the flat hat in these circumstances. But if you're in a public facing role where you're in these areas where the public is looking for that iconic, oh, like the 8-year-old you described, the flat hat is going to be worn because that's what the public identifies, and that's what's going to give them give you the recognition that's necessary in order to interface with them at a level that they recognize immediately from a distance. Oh, there's one of those rangers, and that's really legitimate. I think the main problem I have, besides having gone to Catholic school for 12 years, when I'm in a supermarket, if I see the nun uniform, and it's a uniform, right? It's a uniform. Uh,
It
you know,
strikes fear into those that know
it
it.
my palms start to sweat. You know, I'm I'm an elderly gentleman now, right? Well, elderly, forget the gentleman part. But my God, my palms start to sweat because I think I'm going to get a beating from, and so I can understand your description or your example of some of the people from Mexico coming up that have that kind of hesitancy with someone in uniform. The other thing we know from uniforms, and so I was always extremely concerned in all my roles for the health and safety of employees, right? And so I used to push back on the uniform at the Corps of Engineers because the research will show that when an active shooter, and I always thought that term was stupid. What is a passive shooter? He's a
Right.
shooter, but they would say we'd have all this active shooter training for when some lunatic decides to, kill a bunch of people. When they go into a situation, one of the first things they look for and they'll attack will be somebody in uniform because they see that as an authority figure that's going to be an obstacle to them achieving their goals. So, for the health and safety of my employees, I used to have concern about where they would go wearing their uniform because I knew the uniform enhanced, or not enhanced, but it increased the risk of being a target for some type of animosity or some type of violence. And so I was, and I'd bring that up at the Corps of Engineers because I was a perpetual troublemaker, uh, anti-authority figure an authority figure who's anti-authority. That was my problem. And that would cause uh, quite a bit of displeasure from, and I shouldn't say my superiors because they were just my supervisors. They were not my superiors, and that caused a lot of trouble. And now there's probably, like, if we have anybody watching these podcasts, there's probably a handful of them going, "That's what that guy's probably. He doesn't respect authority. He should have been in that role in the first place to get out there and tell us." So I was always extremely lenient. You had to be professional. You had to look professional, but the actions were more important than the image. Is make sure that when you interface with people, you show them respect. You spend the time with them like you did, and look professional. But I was not concerned whether the nameplate was 2 inches or 2.5 inches above the breast pocket,
Mhm.
or whether somebody had the proper foot gear. As long as it was the proper safety gear, that's important. But
Well,
I
that's
I
another thing to take into consideration. I think you're right, Kevin. It's some of the rules are put into place and haven't been changed, and like safety knowledge, safety gear and stuff has changed over time as well, right? Back in the day, you'd wear baggy clothes working in a factory, right? Then they made machines. Machines grabbed clothes and killed people. I had a cousin worked for the Dorsal plant in Cleveland, Tennessee, and there was a huge lawsuit because she was killed on the job. One of the packaging things grabbed her smock that was issued to her by the company and pulled her through and killed her. And big lawsuit, and now OSHA reflects the outcome of that case, right? Mandatory guards, mandatory, proper wear, blah blah blah. So before I go way on a tangent here, the idea that safety trumps uniformity should be basic within not just the Park Service but everywhere.
Right.
And we tend to forget
100%.
that. We tend to forget that, and like, oh, we have to do this, and this, but safety should always come first, because if it's
the
not,
PPE is number one.
Yeah.
The personal protective equipment. But my point about the uniform creating a target, and it all ties back to the free speech rights. There is a certain standard you have to apply when you're in the workplace, whether it's the private or the public sector, in order to maintain, some type of cohesiveness to the organization, and in order to present the organization in a way that enhances the professionalism and the marketability ultimately of that organization, whether again it's the private or the public sector. That image is important. My concern is always with the people that become obsessive compulsive about, they confuse the uniform standards with the professionalism. Like, if you deviate and you're using the wrong shoelaces, somehow that's a major issue, as opposed to being concerned about the really underlying issues that really they should be focused in on. It was the same thing with the speech. And again, it ties together, because with the speech, and you've seen it. I mean, hence why we're doing this podcast. We couldn't have done this podcast if we were still employed, because there's this hypersensitivity that, while we say we want new ideas and we want open dialogue and we want to have people express themselves and feel comfortable, that's not true. That's not been my experience, regardless of where I worked.
That's our show for today. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm your host, Chris Burnett, joined as always by my good friend, Kevin Heatley, a refugee from New Jersey, the landfill of opportunity. And to you, our listeners, thank you for sharing part of your day with us. We couldn't do it without you. You can find our merchandise, podcast notes, and other fun stuff at www.elburno.com. Elburno is proudly owned and operated by current and former National Park Service Rangers, and every purchase helps support Rangers and their families. A special thanks to our whole team, especially our production crew. This episode, like all the others, was brought to life by our executive producer and all-around wizard, Elise Burnett. We definitely couldn't do this without her. You can also find more about our work and bios at www.elburno.com. Before we close, just a quick reminder, nothing in this podcast should be taken as legal advice. If you need legal guidance, please consult an attorney licensed in your jurisdiction. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. It helps more people find the show and join the conversation. This podcast, along with all related merchandise, is a production of El Burno Studios, a division of El Burno Productions, Ltd.